because this new initiative was announced today, this new policy was announced today, we know that the three of you are on the front lines of the issue, and especially of security with Russia. Russia has been a threat for years. China is also getting a foothold in the region. Maybe I'll start with Premier Pillay on this one. How serious is the danger?
I think it's really just about the preparation that we have to do. I mean, we're seeing more activity. The tempo of the activity continues to increase. I know in the Yukon we have a great relationship with the governor of Alaska, and there's been a lot of dialogue back and forth about what they're seeing off of their coast. We've seen more activity under the guise of research, but yet I think it's something that it's the time right now for us to be vigilant and to start to make sure that the Canadian Armed Forces, the Canadian government understands this increase in activity is significant and that we have to make the proper investments, but not just in defense, but making sure that the infrastructure that Northerners need is being invested in.
Talk to me a little bit about that, Premier Simpson, because I think sometimes that gets forgotten. We always look at the North as, well, we have to defend, we have to put military there. But that is not in itself the answer.
Well, I think when you talk about asserting sovereignty, you know, what's asserting sovereignty right now in the North? And it's the people, right? The fact that we have people there and communities there, because we don't have that hard military infrastructure there the same way that other places like Russia do. And so we really need to focus on the fact that there are people there. And you know, one of the things I appreciated about the new foreign policy is it does have a focus on ensuring there's thriving, resilient, and prosperous northern communities to show that, you know, the North is inhabited, the North is part of Canada, and it is supported by Canada.
And in Nunavut especially, I know you made that point at the press conference, that you can't really have that stability there without supporting the community.
Absolutely, it's about people. I think it's so important to realize that in order for Canada to assert its sovereignty, it has to have healthy communities. And that's something, as Northern Premiers, as my colleagues here, we've really been pushing hard to really see these transformative nation-building opportunities that we do see in our communities. We have to have healthy communities for us to assert sovereignty over the North. And this policy really allows us to be able to play a key role, but to really see these investments come to the North.
How far behind do you think Canada is in getting to this issue and addressing this?
The infrastructure gap between the North and South is huge. Right across the North. In Nunavut specifically, there's absolutely no roads that connect any of the 25 communities. The lack of infrastructure really puts a vulnerability to the North. I'm looking at the deep sea ports that you have for the Navy or the Canadian Coast Guard to be able to provide search and rescue capabilities, among other things. So when you're looking at the infrastructure gap, it is something that really needs to be addressed. But it is through these types of policies where we do see an opportunity for these nation-building projects to come through. Whether it's the Grays Bay Road and Port project, which is right on the mouth of the Northwest Passage, which we know is of interest to all Canadians and that of the world. And so it's through those investments where we do see that gap being addressed.
But Premier Simpson, it's not like these are new issues, and it's not like the threat from Russia is new either. Do you feel like the federal government is a little bit behind in this in trying to address the issues?
Well, I mean, I'll speak again to the infrastructure gaps, and in Northern Canada, we are decades behind the rest of Canada. And so when we talk about having the ability to, you know, even transport the military, connected to forward operating locations that we have in the Northwest Territories, they're not connected by highway. And so we are behind in terms of making those types of investments. But, you know, we're at a different place in the world than we were 20 years ago. China is making moves that it wasn't making before. It's calling itself a near Arctic state. And so that whole world is changing. China also controls a lot of the critical minerals that are critical to the transition to green technology, green energy, and for military applications. And they have the ability to, I won't say manipulate the market, but they can depress prices, they control a lot of that processing. And so that's coming into clear focus now, that we need to really ensure that we have domestic supply chains that we can rely on. And in the North, we have a lot of those critical minerals. We have them in the ground, and we need to start working towards ensuring that they can be extracted.
Premier Pillay, I looked at the announcement and the money that is set aside for this, $34.7 million plus $7 million on a continuing funding basis. It doesn't feel like it's a lot of money to split between your three jurisdictions.
Yeah, I think the diplomatic corps that they've identified, the ambassador for the Arctic, is important. The two consul generals, the consulate work, whether it be in Anchorage and Nuuk and Greenland, I think is important. Having representation in those jurisdictions where businesses that are from our 3 territories and other places in Canada can have representation, and somebody that can make sure that the right connections are made to think about economic prosperity going east-west, west-east, not just north-south, I think is important. That's foundationally, if we're really going to tie the circumpolar north together, it's going to be not just about the federal government having conversations, but it's about our First Nation governments and development corporations working in those directions. It's about business connections. It's about social connections. It's about sport. It's all of those things that'll make us stronger across those regions. There's been strong investment, I think, in our communities through Build Canada funding. We've been able to build affordable housing. We've been able to build horizontal infrastructure. That's coming to an end. I think the 3 of us have always talked about the fact we need to see a larger commitment when it comes to infrastructure. There's been some good things done. I mean, our territory is partnered up with Premier Simpson, and we've just finished an 800-kilometer fiber line. It's the first time that Canada has redundancy in our fiber network, which we did not have. But I think if you talk to my partner in Nunavut, there's still infrastructure of that type that needs to be invested in. So this is a small start, but we're going to need to see a real ambition from governments moving forward in nation-building projects, as PJ said.
And I guess that's why I ask, are we starting so far behind that it's almost, I don't want to say too late, but that we are that far behind?
Yeah, the deficit is enormous, but we really see an opportunity when we're discussing the push for us to get to 2% of NATO spending. The definition of what infrastructure is something we've been pushing for in terms of dual use. And I had used 2 examples of the Grays Bay Road and Port project out in the west part of Nunavut, which has incredible critical mineral potential there, where you could really unlock the incredible wealth that we have right in the land, but also looking at opening up a deep sea port in Qikqtarjuaq, where there's so much potential in terms of the fisheries on the east part. But there's a lot more work to be done, though, and I think this policy is one component of the other policies that have been announced through the defense spending. I know we've had really good conversations with Minister Bill Blair to really look at these dual-use infrastructures in the north, where we could really push for nation-building projects of those that we just talked about.
Premier Simpson, I know that Premier Pillay had mentioned it, but this ambassador, this Arctic ambassador, I think some people may look at it and say, well, what is that going to do to help in not only your area, but also to try and make sure that we are setting ourselves up for defending ourselves against the rise of China and Russia up there? What does that do concretely that maybe Canadians may not understand?
Well, I think, with most situations, if you have good relationships, you can address those situations. And so we want to ensure that there's good relationships among all of the Arctic nations in Canada. And of course, this is federal jurisdiction. I don't want to wade into that. But if you look at the Arctic states now, they're all members of NATO, except for Russia. And so we need to ensure that we are strengthening those ties. And so with, people in Greenland, people in Alaska, we're going to be able to strengthen those ties locally and then move out to the rest of the Arctic and ensure that we're all speaking from the same page.
Okay, unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave it there. Ranj Pillay, the Premier of Yukon, R.J. Simpson, the Premier of Northwest Territories, and P.J. Akayokuk, the Premier of Nunavut. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.